In 54 BC, the Emperor Caesar sent the Roman army to conquer Britannia, but when the Romans got here, they had to turn around, bad weather and blighty. Scuppered Caesar's plans 97 years later. In 43 AD, the Emperor Claudius, he set sail once more to conquer Britain's shores, to wage a war against the Celtic tribes who helped the Gauls and French. The Romans were victorious, their reign was glorious. They changed the Celtic way of life with roads and baths and settlements.
Closer, and welcome to Tales to Wales, the pod that never fails to... Oh, nothing. I got nothing.
My mind's gone blank.
No, let me try again. Welcome to Tales to Wales, the pod that never fails to teach you some history you might not have heard of. You might never even know it existed. About Wales. Lovely Wales. Isn't that in England? It's not fucking in England, you fucking dog. You dirty dog. You dirty fucking dog.
You fucking pig. You fucking
You
pig.
You fucking pig. You fat pig.
Shut the mallet pig.
You shut the mallet pig.
We need to do like when we're doing live together. I'll be there with like my cue cards, you know, like in fucking Love Actually. And you'll be going, the pod that never fails to, and I'll be flicking them away.
Privy to this intro, I was just saying to Jack, I was like, oh, you do the pod, I can never remember the intro for it. And then he's like, oh, you just riff it. I was like, oh, yeah, actually, I'll just riff it. First thing I do, I panic and start shouting.
Yeah, brain gone.
Also, if you'd heard the intro to the last one, you'd have heard how giddy I was that we're back doing this a bit more frequently because Jack's back from his halls, and I had a weekend off booze. But now I'm about 6 Carlins deep, so this second episode's going to be a bit more lucid than the first one, and my enthusiasm.
Loosey-goosey.
But do you have any? We were saying so the last episode we're reading out reviews at the start of the episode. Because we really appreciate you dropping the reviews.
We were reading that. We decided we were going to read them out at the end, but then as much as we appreciate the reviews, you fickle bastards sometimes don't listen to the end of the.
Well, we don't have evidence of that. I'm basing that on what I do because sometimes I just
fair enough.
At the end. Yeah.
So I'm happy to not actually base it on evidence and just base it on personal experience. But we thought we'd start reading them out at the start of the episode instead.
And saying, and we appreciate you dropping them. So
give you a bit of feedback. Give you boys a bit of feedback, you know.
Yeah, and girls, come on now.
Boys is a collective. It's like saying, "All right, guys, you right, boys."
B-O-I-S.
One of the boys. boys.
Welsh boys.
Boys Bach.
Yeah, it's all of us.
You'd say boys Bach to girls, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you'd say that, wouldn't you? You fucking dog.
Say, wouldn't, right, back me up. Don't, you fucking pig. You fucking shut them out, pig. Anyway, so, yes, we're going to do some reviews at the start now. And I'll read you out this one that we selected, special for the episode. This is from Moonface Matt from Apple Podcasts. And the title is Full of Fact and Fun. And he said,
"Is
seems like
plural or
yeah, I think it's meant to be facts. I hate to critique you, Moonface Matt, but
I think he means there's one fact. The rest of it.
Oh, full of that one fact, I think.
Full of one fact.
But hey, fun. Maybe just one fun. Who knows? But so he said, seems like a really great couple of lads and really enjoying the content. This pod was a hidden gem I stumbled across, and I'm glad I did. I went to uni in Wales and have always felt an affinity towards the place. It's cool to learn about the history. Diolch. Well, I'll tell you what, Moonface Matt, that warms my fucking heart, man.
And the affinity is reciprocated. You are one of us. One of us.
He is a boy Bach. Absolutely.
He is a boy Bach. Just about Matt.
One of the boys Bach. Diolch, Matt. I'm assuming your name's Matt with that nickname, so yeah.
Oh, sorry,
cheers,
Mr. Moon. Yeah. Have you got anything to regale us with? Because I had an awkward. Oh, go on.
Oh no, go on. You can go first, and then I'll regale you with a tale of download.
Oh yeah, it's your little rock fest.
Rock fest.
But yeah, mine was just today where because I work remotely and I can't be asked speaking to people. I don't tend to engage too much with people in work. They're amazing. They're such lovely people. I just don't really chat too much to them. But I've been speaking to one a bit more recently, and she's really fun. We have she has a dog. Her partner and her have a dog together. Me and my fiance have a dog together, and they've just got a new puppy. So we were talking about the puppy stages of having a dog.
Classic dog chat, yeah.
Yeah, and her partner lives in Greece, and then we would talk about like, oh, the early, like, do you crate train them? Do you do this? Do you do that? And all this sort of stuff. And then she says, oh yeah, but Diego gets quite sad. And I was like, oh, Diego, that's such a brilliant name for a dog. And he went, no, Diego is my Greek partner. It's like, oh no.
Oh dear.
And then I overcompensated. Oh yeah, no. Like, it's a great name for a person. Perfect name for a person. But what a name for a dog.
No, I was joking. Actually, I was making a joke. And you didn't get it.
It's like when people call their dog Dave, like a human name. It's just fucking scrabbling.
Floundering. The one connection you've made in work and you fucked it already.
Yeah, I called her boyfriend a dog. A dirty little dog.
A dirty little dog. Dirty fucking dog boy. Yeah, my anecdote, I got a couple of little ones. So I went to download
you should say it less prescriptive. You shouldn't make it sound so...
It's more to organise in my own head because I can't think too far ahead because I confuse myself. Oh, right, Jesus.
My anecdote to get this podcast off the ground.
And the critic award goes to fucking Alan Pants. My God.
Don't death name me on this podcast.
Don't push me, boy. So anyway, I was in Download Festival. Anyone listening to the last episode, because we're doing a doubler tonight, will have heard that. And
yeah, you can tell we're fucking snippy with each other.
Yeah, old horse.
It's so hot. It's so
fed up.
It may be in 2 weeks' time the fucking heat wave has died down, but it is in full throttle right now.
The thing is, I love the sun. I love sitting in a beer garden in the sun. But the heat, I cannot take the heat.
I can't abide it.
It was no different in Download, right? All my Download boys, right? Anyone who does the crossover, the rare crossover between Welsh history enthusiasts and Download ticket purchasers, they all know that there was 30,000 extra people there this year.
What, compared to last year?
Compared to the last one, yeah. Or compared to just normal. And guess what? Heat and crowds, it don't mix. Don't mix well at all. Not very nice. And it's because of the mosh pits and shit like that, and it's so dry, it kicks up dust into the air. And I was wearing my glasses and everything, my sunglasses, but the dust was on my eyes, and I was like, it was making my eyes like weep. I was weeping. And someone came up to me and was like going, oh, it is a brilliant set though, isn't it? I was like, I'm not crying at the fucking band, you div. Like, fucking Jesus. Like, I was like, because I was really wiping my eyes, but occasionally if I left it, tears would be rolling out. And yeah, I was just thinking, what do you think? I'm so into this band that I'm going, it's the most fucking beautiful thing. Oh my God. I was like, oh, but fuck off, Lou, Jesus. And yeah, then another one was another story I had there. So I would go with a couple of mates. And then like there's a bigger crowd that they're a part of that I sort of see literally only every time I go to Download. All very nice people. This guy I hadn't really talked to before. I think his name was Leroy. Leroy. And Leroy Jenkins. And he's a young lad. He was got to be in his 20s, early 20s. And I think on the second day he shat himself. And he was going. It was so funny.
The next named him as well. You gave all Leroy the full.
No, Leroy Jenkins. I was making an allusion to.
No, I know. But Lee. Oh, I thought his name was Leroy. I thought his name was Leroy.
Oh no. I think it was Leroy. I might be getting that wrong. Yeah. But anyway, he said him shit himself, and then he was like, I was talking to him the next day. We crossed paths in the shower block. Yes, it's grim. And I was like, oh, you're right, mate. How you feeling? And he was like, oh, not great. I shat myself. And I was like, oh, right. I was fucking hell, really? And he went, yeah. He's like, I piss myself all the time. Like, no problem with that. I've got no problem with that. But shit myself, he's like, that's like a new personal best for me. And I was like, personal best? What a way to describe it. And anyway, I was like, well, good luck with it, mate. Have a good one. But he was kind of a saving grace because Download was 4 days this year instead of 3. And I was thinking, oh, that's class, another full day of drinking. But by the 4th day, my body was fucking broken. And like I was like, I can't do this anymore. But I passed Leroy, who I talked to. And I was going, oh, you all right, mate? Oh, and he's like,
what's that smell?
Enough. Oh, yeah, I've shat myself again. But no, he was like, oh, I've had enough now. I've had enough. I'm not drinking today, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, hang on. I've just had like my first can. Therefore, I am just as good and just as healthy as like a young 20-year-old. There's life in the old dog yet. I can keep this going forever. I'll never die. No, nothing.
Oh,
Tough crowd.
I thought you were going to say something happened.
No, that's it. That was my revelation.
So your revelation was you can drink for 4 days. And
Yeah, still. If I can outdrink a 20-year-old, I thought that was good. That was a revelation.
I cannot believe you thought that was your road to Damascus moment of...
This wasn't a fucking like punchline thing. I was just trying to tell a tale. Good God.
What's the tale? Oh, I'm really good at being an alcoholic.
No, the tale is it's a tale of fucking
I'm a
adventure.
legend. You don't get it. I'm a legend.
Listen, Hero's Journey. Have you heard of it? Yeah, read a fucking book. It's fucking...
If you go to Spoons, you'll see someone doing their fucking 1,000th day on the cans.
Yeah, but I was struggling. It's a personal journey. My hero's journey. I thought I had it all. I thought I could drink with the best of them. Got to fucking day 3. I was struggling. Steve Rudder thinking, am I past it? Am I facing my own mortality? It's okay. I've seen a little young'un that couldn't, that was stopped drinking, and I could. And I was like, yes, I've still got it, baby. I'm renewed. I've got life again.
Tortoise and the hare.
Step.
A modern day Aesop's fable.
Exactly, and you fucking, it was met with fucking silence.
I
never felt so low. I felt so low as when I said finished it, and I went, all right, nothing, is it?
I was staring thinking, oh, maybe he's like having a gulp and he's ready to tell me what happened next.
I'll be able to see that in the fucking edit, because it'll be a fucking straight line on the old audio waves there, just to fucking rub it in.
That's so funny. I've actually got sweat on from that.
Yeah,
what?
same
Nothing?
Nothing? Nothing? My tail?
That belongs. Yeah, we should do a whole series upon Jack's valiant effort to drink for 4 days in a row.
Jesus. One of my oldest friends couldn't even gift me a little or something like that.
No,
something.
It wasn't that I didn't think it was funny. It's a funny story that you drunk for 4 days, but I was like, oh, but you do that anyway. You've done that before. It's like, oh, he's got something else.
This is why it's different. It's like the old bull. He can't, he's past it, or is he? No, he's still got some fight in him.
Well, I'm so glad you've still got enough in you to drink hot cans in a field 4 days
Exactly, hot cans. You don't even know the amount of Rennies I was fucking down in on that thing.
From one hero to another, let's go on to today's topic.
Swiftly into
Caradog.
Let's see if he's done anything as fucking valiant as me, shall we?
God, no. Oh, God, I'm overheat. I'm hot. I'm going to take a second to fucking cool down.
Your body's too vibrating too much from the giggles.
Right, so... a little backstory. So if you listened to last week's episode, Jack did a fantastic job of covering the Celts in Wales. But I'm going to do a quick... but he did a fantastic job of drinking 4 days in a row, let I mind you, in a row, and a little boy couldn't keep up with him.
You are fucking misrepresenting my tale. I'm not having it.
I think I'm perfectly representing your tale.
You're boiling it down to a very bad synopsis, okay?
Bad. That's bad. All right, anyway.
Right, go on, tell us about bloody Caradog, come on.
A little back history of the Celts in Wales. So long before the Romans and their fancy la-di-da roads shuffled away across Europe and changed the reality of Britain. Before that, the Celts came to these green and pleasant lands from, you said, places like France, Germany, but lots of what we call now the Mediterranean. Early sources placed Celts in Western Europe and also occupying lands at the headwaters of the Danube River. You mentioned that as well, I think.
I didn't mention the river, but yes, that is true, yeah.
Yeah, so I won't go over that, just listen to last week's episode. It's a really good episode. So there were, some classical writers have recorded a huge, large-scale migration of Celts soon after 400 BC. We know the Celts came somewhere between 1000 and 600 BC, but a really big migration of that came around 400 BC from Central Europe and Northern Italy and Eastern Europe. I don't know why Northern Italy gets there.
Yeah, Northern Italy gets mentioned a lot when you're talking about the old Celtic civilization.
Romans are from there, so I imagine maybe that's why it's
That's probably
distinct.
maybe the first encounter they had with the Celts or something.
Yeah.
As you mentioned earlier as well, it's, when you say, it could be 1000 BC or 600 BC, that's quite a differential. But like we said in the last episode, the only people that were in Britain before them were Neanderthals that were wiped out way before.
Very true.
And like how much was being written down then, how could you even tell when that was?
But what we do know is they lived through the Iron Age, the Roman Age, and then partly through the post-Roman Age. Today, Wales is seen as a Celtic nation, and the Welsh Celts are something we often feel that defines us as being different from England, and something I think a lot of us are quite proud to be associated with, like mostly because they came across these maniacs and legends whenever they're depicted on telly. They're like unruly and untamable. But there wasn't just one nation of Celts, in quotations. If you listen to Jack's episode that came out last week, you'll know that in Wales, Celtic formed 4 or 5 tribal peoples. We say 5 because me and Jack had a raging argument about who those 5 were.
If you haven't listened to the last argument, you want to see us falling out, fucking go back.
You think this was frosty to begin with? No, it's just that there's a part
that's
of
why
one
it was
tribe.
frosty. There's so much resentment there still.
So just in case you didn't hear last week's episode, I'll quickly recap. By the time of the Roman invasion of Britain, there were 4 tribal peoples occupied 4 areas of modern-day Wales. They were the Ordovices, northwest.
Yeah, or Divises, or whatever. I don't know how exactly to spell it.
Yeah, no, that sounds better, mate. Ordifices, northwest. The Desangli.
Deciangli. I
yes,
used it like
northeast.
I did it
I'm not
with
making
like
it.
The English. The Welsh pronunciation of the C. Instead of doing like a as an S.
Okay.
I was like Deciangli. That's what I went for.
Deciangli, northeast. The Demete, southwest.
Demete, yeah.
And then the Salers.
Anything more from the bar, Salers?
Can you say the 4 of them? And then Jack also had a 5th one in his, but it was mostly in England with a little bit in Paris.
That was
and Wrexham.
Contentious one though, that wasn't it?
Yeah.
Let me find it now. Yeah, so it was the Deciangli in the northeast, the Ordovices in the northwest, the Demete in the southwest, and then the Cilliers in the southeast.
Thank you very much. So now this episode is going to focus primarily on the Cilliers, or more so their leader. So, known in Brythonic, he was Caratakos. In Middle Welsh, he was Caratug. In Modern Welsh, he's called Caradog. In Breton, he was called Caradeg. In Greek, Carapatok. And in Latin, Caraticus. So you might know him as Caraticus. And we know him as Caradog.
Of course, it makes sense. I don't know why I didn't think this, but he would have names in all the Celtic sort of sub-languages and stuff.
He became so prevalent and famous and renowned that there was a name for him in pretty much all the countries. So it kind of speaks to his fame that they all had a separate name for him. But I'm going to stick to his Welsh name, so Caradog. And this man deserves more episodes dedicated to him, so maybe we'll do a backstory and focus on other elements of his life, because he became a leader.
He's a big boy.
He was, but he wasn't always the leader of the Cilliers, or Cilliers. How do you say it? Cilliers?
Cilliers, I say it. I don't know if that's right.
So he was a leader of...
Cilliers.
And now I'm going to struggle with this one as well. He was a leader of the Catavalani tribe. Do you want to say it?
Perfect, mate. That's how I would say it. Catavalani,
The Catavalani tribe found in England, and he had a strong but ultimately failed resistance from the Romans. Again, Jack covered all this well last week, so go back and listen to that. Apparently, whilst the Roman legion were fighting in Gaul, some of the Belgae tribe of Celts, found today in the northeast France and Belgium, they escaped to Britain. And there's another one you mentioned. Is that who you mentioned? The Vici?
Oh, the Veneti were the ones I mentioned. Yeah. They're in northern Brittany. They are.
Yeah,
or were, rather.
And in Belgium, there are also this tribe called the Belgae. So when the Romans were fighting them, they saw that they crossed over the river to Dover. They crossed over the river to England. And the Romans then, after conquering them, they started to follow the suit. They followed those who escaped and then just followed them, knowing there was a group of Celts on this new land they'd seen Britain. We knew that they knew about Britain beforehand from trade routes and stuff we discussed before, but this is the first time they turned their eye to thinking, right, we're going to conquer.
And I suppose, because they were escaped enemies, if you like, there's more of a... Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this led Caesar and his ships to follow over, and they ended up landing in Dover around 55 BC. Now, the Roman Empire probably knew, like I just said, they knew Britain was there, and there was already well-established trade routes, and they'd put for centuries beforehand. But this was the first time a Roman leader had stood on terra firma.
Terra firma?
I think that's what it's called, like something in space. Just mean this is the first time he stood on the Earth in Britain. He stayed for a week. And he took in the sights, and he probably had some bloody old fish and chips and a lovely pot of bitter.
What, a steak del pie, yeah?
Oh, what
that's
a lovely
battered sausage?
pie and mash, please, governor. All right, my love. Then he fucked off back to the continent for some fucking tapas. And now some people say this is where his famous Vini Vidi Vici statement comes from, which means "I came, I saw, I conquered." However, most people debunk that, and they think it really came after they think it came after he won a battle in Asia Minor, which is now Turkey, or Asia Minor, which is now Turkey.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so the Romans decided to start their conquest in 43 AD. So that's nearly 100 years after Caesar came to Britain. So
that's right.
Check. Yeah. They sent a bloke called Platius. Is that what you said his name was? Platius? It's alright. I'm going to leave us all this in. That dude, Jack's episode covered it. We're laughing. And so they sent a bloke over the Mariel Channel with a fuck-off army of... Did yours have 4 legions and auxiliary forces?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Which equated to a whopping 40,000 soldiers. And I can't believe we just said the word whopping. Did a Clarkson.
What a whopping.
A whopping 40,000. I'm Clarkson. If I told you I'd bring 30,000 troops, you think I was lying. If I told you it was 40,000, you think I was mad.
It was the biggest Roman army
if
in
I
Britain.
Told you I was going 40,000 legionnaires, you think I was crackers. Fuck off.
What do you think of that, Hammond?
For a hamster, fuck off, Clarkson.
Fuck off, mate.
So now this has been more accurate. In the History of Wales, which is a book by John Davis. You know we said we're going to be more accurate this year. Sorry, this season. There's a really, really fantastic book called The History of Wales by John Davis. He explains that although the island of Britain was only a 13th of the territory of the Roman Empire, it was unnecessary to deploy a 10th of the army for centuries due to the ferocity of the Brits. So you got a hand with this little island. We are ferocious. So yeah,
I always love the term ferocious comes up so much in these, like when you in the research, like not just like aggressive or whatever that, but there could be any sort of you could pick up a thesaurus and pick another word, but ferocious comes up a lot. Makes it sound like they were really nasty bastards.
So yeah, Britain was a 13th of the territory of the Roman army, but he needed a 10th of the army here. And by 47 AD, so 4 years after the conquest started, the pesky Romans had conquered the Britons, or the Britons, who are the Celtic tribes of southern Britain. That's Brythons. I think you mentioned last week.
Brythonics,
The Brythonics, and the way you spell that changes now after, because of the Roman invasion. So now they turn their focus to Wales, specifically southeast Wales, where the Celtics were. And as time goes by, the Celtics became one of the biggest thorns in the side of the Romans. They were ruthless, barbaric, brave, wild, mad, and they knew this land far better than the invaders. At this time, their leader was Captain Caradog. He had joined them after losing his kingdom of Catavolani, which was one of the Brythonic tribes in southern Britain I just mentioned. But apparently he had a really strong resistance for years, but like you said last week, the Romans kept throwing more and more at him, and they fell back. His brother died, and he retreated, heading back west to Wales.
Yeah, he actually was, I don't know if you're going to say this, so cut this if you are going to say this, and I'll act surprised, but the reason he hated the Romans is because his father promised land, obviously on his death, promised lands to his brothers and whatever, and the Romans were real dicks about it, and they didn't acknowledge his will, or not will, but his inheritance, and they tried to take lands back that they didn't rightfully own, which made the brothers really anti-Roman, and that's what sort of spurred them on.
Oh no, I wasn't going to cover that. So I'll actually pose. What? They did what? But now the Romans were hell-bent on conquering Wales, and they had sent 2 permanent legionary fortresses on the Welsh border, one in Chester in the north, and then one in Wales in Caerleon in the south. So the Romans now were the richest, best trained, best equipped, most skilled fighters the world had ever seen at this point. But fighting in Britain was new to them in terms of having to fight in valleys and on peats and on marshlands, and having to deal with this guerrilla fighting rather than open field real battles, something the Romans struggled with a lot in Britain.
A classic Welsh defence.
Classic Welsh. Say. And I was just going to say, Caradog embodies that guerrilla fighter, and that's something that Wales has constantly shown throughout its history. Is that we always use nature, we always use the land that we know to be our an addition in the battlefield.
It's a bit strange that we say, it's a classic Welsh tactic. At this point, it wasn't a classic Welsh tactic, I suppose, because it was like the first time they'd probably had to use it. But
they'd never been invaded before.
By medieval times, that's thousands of years of using this.
In football, Jack, you call that Route 1 football.
Route 1 football. I was just about to say
4-4-2, yeah.
Oh, fucking... That's a 4-4-2 defence, are you saying? Yeah. We're classic purple patch.
Caradog embodied this guerrilla fighter. So he attacked regiments from thick forests and steep valleys, and as they were crossing rivers, and he'd ambush them and their wagons as they rolled over difficult peat terrain. They'd sling stones, spears, javelins. So he'd run in with hand-to-hand combat. The Roman legions in their plates of armour, and the Celts, these Celts specifically, bollock naked, they'd be there fighting very quickly. There'd be a quick slash and, hand-to-hand fighting, and then all of a sudden they'd be gone. They'd throw everything at them for a few minutes and they'd scarp and vanish like your dad did when you were younger. Sorry.
Oh, such a long setup, and you had to do it, didn't you? Good Lord.
And
why are you after me this
hey,
this
you love a little joke like that.
I love just being involved. I love being a centre of attention, don't I?
Anyway, and when Caradog did fight on open ground, in a real battle formation, so like I said before, Caradog mostly fought in this guerrilla style, but he would occasionally fight a real. When I say real, I mean like in the sense of how you'd seen a movie where you have one army. I know what you mean, like on a flat land sort of thing. Yeah. Well, when he did do that, his men never formed orderly ranks, so the Romans didn't quite know how to defend or attack because they're an unorthodox way of battling. So the Romans, who were disciplined and had this very regimented way of fighting, they'd see these like troops just moving around nowhere. It was very, very it's confusing and difficult to know when to attack or when you're being tricked or when you went to defend.
I can imagine, like with the Celts as well. This is another thing that I didn't, I mentioned in the last episode that they Celts invented chainmail. And like another thing you don't realise is Celts use chariots quite a lot.
Yeah, I know that, and then they just disappear. Like chariots are really prevalent in this, and then they fuck off.
I think it's because if you think about it, they're not really that great. Like with cavalry, you can charge a formation. With a chariot, the horse might get through, and then you might like get your chariot caught. And then you're
stuck.
Yeah, they're more for like running circles around people and just like hurling javelins and stuff.
And that's the thing. They weren't as big on the bow as like we expect people in Wales to be. The bow was the thing that was invented far later.
Spears and javelins.
Javelins, stones. So his men were also really famed for fighting until the last breath. They'd fight up until death. As in, when they were in a real open battle, they would just battle until they died, which meant the Romans never had anyone to chase or find out where Caradog's main camp was. They never took any prisoners because they were just dead and they would never retreat.
Well, they had a similar, not too different actually.
It's like Vikings style.
Similar to Vikings. It wasn't like a Valhalla situation, but it was like they believed in a good death. And they knew that, like dying well was like a thing to them. That if you died for your country or your tribe, if you like, then you'd be promised something good in the afterlife.
Also, by this stage, they'd been fighting the Romans for a long time, and they saw what the Romans did to prisoners. They saw that they can't just run. You have to by one time take it.
There's no point running. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
No. And so in 49 AD, the Romans established a really contemporary, very powerful military base at Gloucester, which is now Gloucester Services. It's not, but what a service station that is. Absolutely banging. It is one of the most contemporary, powerful service stations in all of the UK.
I'll say credits to Romans. You've done a blind
second only to T-Bay on the Scottish-English border, which I imagine was also a Roman outpost, but it's a fucking banging service station.
I haven't been there, but I'm going to stick it on my list.
T-Bay is fantastic. It's got like a butcher's there. It's got a bakery. It's mind-blowing, man. It's beautiful.
That's good. I went to Donington on the way back from download. I tell you what, I can tell you no Roman designed that because it is bloody rubbish.
Lee Delamere, not too bad, but we won't get into the service station chat here.
I digress.
So, when they set up this giant, powerful military base in Gloucester, Caradog decided now it was time to retreat his forces into the land of the delicacies and the Decangli, the ones he's mentioned earlier.
Deciangli, that's what I call
so
it.
Those
again, I have no idea if what I'm saying is correct.
But for context, that's the ones in the northwest and the northeast. Those are the two. Like I mentioned, they were the two tribes in the north of Wales. And whilst he was there, he didn't live some bookish life. He used his army to continue terrorising the Romans, but he realised he couldn't keep retreating forever, mostly because there's nowhere left to retreat to. They're in North Wales now. You can't go anywhere else. And he had around 30,000 warriors to his name, and he decided it was time to get rich or die trying, a.k.a. it was time to stand up and be accounted for. So now, unlike our previous episodes, we got history stuff written down. Like we've actually got our books to help us with a bit more of the detail. And you mentioned before Tacitus, or I always call him Tacitus, but it's
Tacitus, yeah.
Tacitus, yeah. Tacitus.
Tacitus, is what I say.
Tacitus. Tacitus. So I'm going to read from the Roman historian.
So keep saying it different to me. We keep going, yeah, and then saying it differently to each other.
Yeah. Tomicus, yeah.
Yeah.
Tacitus. Tacitus?
Tacitus.
Tacitus.
Tacitus. Say it with me.
So now we have a. So I'm going to read to you from this little boffin. Tacitus.
Yeah, there we go. You got
Tacitus, yeah, Tacitus, and he was famed for writing down battles and of history. So he was like this absolute square who jotted everything down. He said about the Roman army marching towards this big battle that was going to be coming up. The army marched against the Cities, a naturally fierce people, and now full of confidence of the might of Caradog, which is Caradog's name in Latin. So, like I said, full of confidence in the might of Caradog, who by many an indecisive and many a successful battle had raised himself far above all other generals of Britons, inferior in military strength, but deriving an advantage from a deceptiveness of the country, as in he could use the country to his aid.
Yeah.
He once shifted the war by a stratagem into the territory of the Ordovices. Yeah, where, joined by all who dreaded peace with us, he resolved a final struggle. So what he's saying there is he went up to these other tribes and said, listen lads, let's use this country that we know is ours. Let's fucking have one last scrap.
Yes, have a scrap, boy.
And now, because they mentioned Caradog's men didn't have armour. I know you said they made it, but he didn't. This particular tribe thought better to fight nimbly without armour.
Well, think as they might have invented chainmail, but back then, how long do you think it would make to make like a coat of chainmail? It would have taken fucking forever. You can't outfit an army with that.
No, true. So they were outnumbered, they were outskilled, out armoured, and they out disciplined. So he's really careful in picking his battleground because he knew all this. Like he's aware that he's fighting the best army the world's ever seen, and he's picking this battleground knowing it's probably going to be his last battle. So he picked the rolling hills that had a river around it in a place called Aft Gethin, which is west of Caradog, so like mid Wales area. And Caradog knew the Romans wanted to find his camp. For years they've been trying to find his camp, but they just couldn't find it. Because back then as well, Wales was so thick in forest. It was an ancient rainforest.
How hard would it be to traverse anywhere? Basically when the reason the Silurian sort of area got so Romanized is because they built all the forts and roads. It was easier to navigate. Up north and to the southwest. It was still thick forest and
it's called an ancient forest, which means it's it's been there. The ancient forest survived up until Edward I when he cut it all down to fuel his war machine against the Welsh, and also to stop the Welsh hiding in the forest because it's proper thick wood.
You mentioned
and
that
it covered
old Longshanks, the old fucking lumberjack himself.
And the only time it got as deforested was when the government needed to get more wood for the Second and First World War. And they are doing efforts to make Wales a forest country again, but this whole land, especially mid Wales, South Wales, going up to North Wales, was covered. Yeah. So Caradog, he knew the Romans were trying to find his camp, but he thought he never really showed where he was. But he thought, no, do you know what? I'm going to drag them to me. And so he built a new hill fort with the occasional stone wall at different parts of the hill to appear as little places his men could hide behind. He built spear traps and other rudimentary defences. And he sent his men out over, I think it was over 2 years to lure the Romans to him. He didn't want to play it too obvious, so he ordered his men to employ guerrilla tactics and launch attacks, and they'd run back far enough to bring the Romans edging closer to his new camp. And
he's an absolute Celtic Rambo using his little fucking traps.
Yeah, he's got the old fucking Home Alone tactic on the go. And
sorry, I meant to say Celtic Kevin McAllister.
You little snap weasel.
The governor of Britannia then, Kevin.
Kevin. So What does he say when he sees his brother's girlfriend? When he looks at a
Oh,
photo.
Caradog, woof.
Yeah. So, anyway, so he positioned his camp in a way that was quite easily detected in an attempt to lure the full Roman army away from these bases he'd set up. But he did it in a way that was over 2 years, so the Romans were just getting fucking terrorized, and they were, they was It was a real war tactic to like slowly and surely break them down. So they were like, "Fuck
chip
it,
away
we're
at the
coming out."
morale.
Yeah, yeah, and it worked. And after about 2 years of being plagued, the Romans found the camp under Ostorius Scapula, Ostorius Scapula, who I often call Pistorius.
Oscar Pistorius,
Oscar
the man
Pistorius, yeah,
himself.
yeah, Ostorius Pistorius. He got his army, and he finally found out, and he's like marched towards where they were. And this battle was huge. It meant everything to the Celts. If they won, they would drive the Romans essentially out of Wales. But it also meant loads to the Roman soldiers. Initially, their leader, Asturias, he didn't want the battle, but the Roman lads had been attacked for so long, they wanted to call an end to being haunted by the Celts throughout this land. So they
I
all
can
buff
imagine
in.
them just being like, look, I'm not up for a fight because I've been fucking, my morale's been chipped away at, but also, come this just end? Like, I don't mind going into a big scrap, but can we just
our
call it a
boy,
day?
our old boffin, Tacitus, I'm going to call him Tacky. Fuck it, I'm calling him Tacky. Deal with that. Tacky saw that Oscar Pistorius, or Ostorius Scapula, he saw Caradog rallying his men and seeing them in a feverish attitude, and the Celts, Tacky said, such enthusiasm confounded the Roman general, and the river was in his face, the rampant he thought was too high up. So I'll read verbatim of what Tacky said. He said, such enthusiasm confounded the Roman general, the river too in his face, the rampant they had added to it, the frowning hilltops, the stern resistance, and the masses of fighting men everywhere, the masses of fighting men everywhere, apparent, daunted him. So that's him saying, like, Oscar, not Oscar Pistorius, this
The
Roman
Roman
general,
leader, yeah.
the Roman leader was like, shit, they're on the hill, we got a river behind us, they are fucking wild for it,
He sounded like he
our
was
boy,
fucking pupping himself a little bit,
yeah,
didn't he? Like seeing the
and
fucking
probably
Celts
just
all
being a
up for it.
clever general, thinking this is going to be a tough battle.
We're in a bit of a box here, like, yeah.
But, like we just mentioned a minute ago, the Roman troops who at this point had been trudging around Wales after Caradog for some years, Caradog for so many years, they were really eager to fucking nip this in the bud. And Taki said his soldiers insisted on battle, exclaiming that valour would overcome all things, and that the prefects and tribunes with similar language stimulated the adored of the troops. So Taki wrote that Caradog and his chieftains, like this was the battle they had to do. The Celts were up for it, the Romans were up for it. Taki also went on. I can't believe I called him Taki, but I'm going to have to.
It's all right, yeah. I'm sure he'd love it, mate. He'd be proud to be on this pod.
Taki wrote that Caradog and his chieftains were giving speeches that were causing the Celts to enthuse so much that the hills shook. Caradog was running from section to section, instilling bravery and madness and anger and vengeance, all this stuff, whipping them up. So I quote, he went rank to rank, encouraging and confirming the spirit of their men by making light of their fears, kindling their hopes, and by every other warlike incitement. As for Caratacus, he flew hither and thither, protesting that that day and that battle would be the beginning of the recovery of their freedom, or the everlasting bondage. He appealed by name to their forefathers who had driven back the dictator Caesar, by whose valour they were free from the Roman axe and tribute, and still preserved inviolate the person of their wives and their children. Which, while thus speaking, the host shouted applause, while every warrior bounded himself to the national oath not to shrink from weapons or wounds. So he was given a proper speech to the lads.
I tell you what, should we sack the pod off? We'll go march on Parliament. I'm quite keen.
Yeah.
Absolutely inspired.
Well, however, the time for words has ended, and now it's time for actions to begin. And as the Romans begin marching through the river and start going up the hill, some hidden Celts who are tucked away rush from the flanks and start attacking with spears and stones, and the occasional hand-to-hand fighting. And then again, they rush away and they're gone within a second. So it's that chaotic manner again. So the minute this battle starts, they're already being this fucking guerrilla tactics. But once the Celts have rushed back, and as the Romans now properly start marching up this hill for, the sky apparently turned black with a giant volley of tens of thousands of spears and arrows in one big flurry. And that caused a huge loss to those auxiliary soldiers who we mentioned before. So they're the light armoured soldiers who didn't have the full...
their fodder, basically. You know,
Yeah,
like when I know we mention all the time, but when you play medieval Total War and you
yeah,
get the
the
militia in,
peasants, yeah, the militia.
they're just your fucking fodder
Yeah.
guys, aren't they?
Well, after they got a bit of a battering, the Romans whipped out the old tortoise, the famous testada
Yeah,
formation. So
Tostada, that's it. Yeah,
So I'm sure you all know this, but it's that famous Roman tactic of creating a shell out of shields, meaning they can march up and withstand barrages of arrows, shields, and spears, and stones and spears and stuff. And like we've talked about this before, the longbow doesn't come into effect to Wales until about the 11th century. So if they did have any bows, they weren't armor piercing at all. So
no,
old Taki wrote, when they reached the barrier, it was a long fight with missiles, and the wounds and the slaughter fell chiefly on our soldiers. But when we formed the military testado, and the rude, ill-compacted fence of stones was torn down, and it was equal hand-to-hand engagement, the barbarians retired to the heights. Yet even there, both light and heavy armoured soldiers rushed to the attack. The first harassed the foe with missiles, with the latter closed with them, and with the opposing ranks of the Britons were broken, destitute as they were of the defence of breastplates and helmets, meaning they didn't have any armour on them. And when they faced the auxiliaries, they were felled by the swords and the javelins of our legionnaires. And if they turned round, they were met with the sabres and spears of the auxiliaries. So now they've been pincered in. So they had this big tortoise formation going up the hill, taking all
yeah,
their front. And when the tortoise formation got through, they were fighting hand to hand, and that gave chance for the auxiliaries to come behind them and throw their spears and all that stuff at them.
they do. Well, I've read that like um, the Romans at the time, the actual Romans, now the centurions, they were like unparalleled in like sort of close quarters as
Yeah,
well. So if you got in with them, unless you were fucking something special, you were gonna go down. So that's why the Celts loved the
quick
guerrilla
gorilla.
tactics, because you
Yeah.
couldn't really fight them unless you had silly number advantage, which we never did.
Well, now that the Celts, they had no real plan, and it was just vicious
Mm.
fighting that resulted in huge losses on both sides. But the Romans could always be replenished, and Caradog knew that they couldn't win, and the Romans now were up the hill, so he called his men to retreat as best they could. Caradog got away, but his wife and children were captured. So he fled north, seeking refuge among the Brigantes. But
That's right, yeah, sort of North Englandy place, isn't it?
yeah. So the Brigantian queen, Cartamandua, depended on Rome for a personal position. So she was like in the pocket of Rome already. So when he rocked up there asking for refuge, she took him in and then fucking snaked him and handed him over to the Romans.
Ah, what a
So
fucking
yeah, yeah,
snake in the
rat
grass.
dog. So they sent him over to Rome in chains, and he got shipped off there. He was reunited with his family as a prisoner. Um, but as he was going across, to Caradog's surprise, his fame and clout and respect as a warrior was now well renowned far outside of Britain, and he and his family were the central attraction of a triumphal parade through the streets of Rome before the Emperor Claudius. Caradog's defeat was publicly likened by the senators to some of Rome's greatest ever victories. So beating Caradog was up there with one of the best things they'd ever done.
Mm.
And Oscar Pistorius Scapula was awarded the triumphal ornaments for defeating him. Um, and after all this backslapping and parading these these poor barbaric
Pomp and
captives,
ceremony, like,
yeah.
yeah.
At the end of this big ceremony, it was normal practice then for them to be the prisoners to be executed, either by way of like combat, getting killed by fucking gladiators, getting eaten by tigers,
Yeah.
all that shit. However, Caradog, not only being master of the sword, he was also master of the words, and he gave a speech that persuaded Claudius to spare him and his family. He was actually granted freedom, and he travelled the neighbouring islands and provinces, and his fame was like growing more and more. He was kind of like a celebrity. He was actually, when he got to Italy, parts of Italy, they actually did celebrate him. They had like a holiday when he arrived to celebrate him.
Yeah.
So Taki wrote, all were eager to see the great man who for so many years had defied our power. Even at Rome the name Carathicus was no obscure one, and the emperor, while he exalted his own glory, enhanced the renown of the vanquished. The people were summoned as a grand spectacle. They came in a procession of royal vassals, and the ornaments and neck chains and spoils which the king had won in wars to one of the tribes. So everything that Carathicus had won had been taken as well to show off as like, look how much this man has won. Now we've beaten him as well.
Now we get it, yeah.
And he went on to say, next we were to be seeing his brothers, his wife, his daughter, and last of all, Carathicus himself. All of the rest stooped in their fear to abject supplication, but not the king. As in, Caradog didn't even look scared when he was imprisoned.
Mm.
He was just still there, like kind of heroic and not that bothered. So Tacitus, he would have been a small child when all this happened, but he reports Caradog's words verbatim. So people think he was either given to them on a scroll, or he was so keen about writing shit down that even as a young kid, he wrote down exactly what was said.
He was a boffin, to be fair.
Yeah,
Sort of
through and through.
yeah.
Do you want to hear what he noted down that Caradog said that saved his life? So, do you want to hear what Caradog said to save his life?
Of course, I want to see it was. He's obviously, like you said, they were customarily executed, weren't they? So
Yeah.
he must have said some pretty fucking hot shit to get out
Yeah.
get out of boiling water.
And I read that he knew Latin because he'd been fighting them for so long, and he'd kept, by that time he knew Latin enough himself to
learn the
converse
tongue of thy
the
enemy.
Yeah.
I like that.
So bear with me, but he said, had my moderation in prosperity been equal to my noble birth and fortune, should I have entered this city as your friend rather than as your captive, and you would not have disdained to receive, under a treaty of peace, a king descended from illustrious ancestors and ruling many nations. So he said, like, if you'd have met me like how I am, I'm a king, I have a fucking, all this stuff beneath me, like, if it
As a
wasn't for
guest in the
battle,
city,
you'd see me as a
yeah.
guest. Yeah. He went, my present lot is as glorious to you as it is degrading to myself. I had men and horses, arms and wealth. What wonder if I parted with them reluctantly? If you Romans choose to lord it over the world, does it follow that the world is to accept slavery? Were I to have been at once delivered up as a prisoner, neither my fall nor your triumph would have been famous. You say, like, if I gave up straight away, you'd have achieved nothing. Because I fight for this. Yeah. My punishment would be to be followed by oblivion, whereas if you save my life, I shall be an everlasting memorial of your clemency. Upon this, the emperor granted pardon to Caradog, his wife, and his brothers, and his children. So they were released from their bonds, and they weren't allowed to go back home, but they were allowed to stay in thingy as no longer prisoners, as kind of people, as a liberated person who'd been conquered. And really, what he was saying is, like, how can you have a go at me? Like, if someone invaded your country, what would you do? I'm a king. I was in charge of these men, these horses. Like, of course I have to fight back. You're asking me to do something that's not within nature. And they were like, yeah,
no, I absolutely love that. To say, like, when you land on my shores, sort of thing, do you expect me to just accept that I'm going to be a slave or a fucking whatever? And of course I'm going to fight back. Like, don't be bunch of bloody
he's also
Roman thickos, isn't it?
playing on their like ego by saying like, I've given you better honor because I didn't accept it. Like, if I were just to roll over and take it, where would your triumph and fame be? Like, it's because of how brave and strong I was that you had a story to tell. Well, what is funny is, well, like, Caradog, so after his liberation, he he gave a bit of a slight dig to our humble Welsh background. According to Cassius, Caradog was so impressed by the city of Rome. Cassius said, Caradog, a barbarian chieftain who was captured and brought to Rome and later pardoned by Claudius, he wandered about the city after his liberation, and after beholding its splendour and magnitude, he exclaimed, can ye then, who have such great possessions and so many of them, cover our poor huts? So he's asking, how can you, with all this, look at our shit buildings and be like, yeah, I want that as well?
Let's be honest though, that's a Roman fucking historian going like, yeah. And then the boy that we fucking beat, he came to my house, right, and he said it was way fucking better than yours. So like,
although,
get over it.
I mean, you look at Rome and you look at Iron Age huts and stuff. You think, yeah,
that's true.
The Roman bath might be a bit better.
You've been to St. Fagans, mate? Do you think that looks like Rome?
It is mad how advanced the Romans were, isn't it? Like, it's crazy how good their shit was.
The thing is, I always think that because they had such a wide empire, they got
true.
like
They just
best
steal everyone
of
else's.
every thing they conquer, and they get something. Oh, this is a bit new, and this is better than what we have. They just incorporate that, and that's how they became the best.
Yeah, fair enough. And sorry, I'll fuck right off.
Yeah,
Romans shit.
Yeah, stop having an opinion, all right?
Well, that's the end of Caradog. I hope you enjoyed.
That was excellent. I didn't realise, like, my book that I read sort of touches on him a little bit and gives a little bit of like sort of detail, but nowhere near as much as what you just give there. So
I read a lot of that in a book called Battles for Wales, which is this book spin-off of Tales for Wales, but it chronologises all the battles from around, like, from him pretty much up until like the battle for the Welsh language, and it covers like maybe 20 battles in there, and it does specific battles, which I really enjoyed. Like, it gives and it helps you realise why. So at the end of every battle, then it will cover on to the next battle and what's happened in between. And Caradog was like the last resistance to the Celts that gave a real resistance to a Roman.
I'll have to, I'm nicking that book from you, mate.
Yeah, I'll bring it over. You'll really like it. I love it, and it's small. It's easy to read. It's like a it's a
small. It's like simple words.
Well, it's
font,
about 150 pages, but it's about a square size of a bigger postcard. It's not a fucking mammoth, so it's not too big.
No, that's really good, man.
That's it then. So we got a really good lineup for this series. We're really happy with what we got planned for it. But as always, drop us a message if you've got anything you'd like us to cover. And thanks for being with us so far on the journey. And that's it.
Follow as usual. Follow the socials and all that. Do your reviews. We always appreciate it. And also, if you do a 5-star review now, then we might, if you're lucky, read it out. So think about it. Think about it, baby.
All right, diolch yn fawr pawb. Catch you soon.
Diolch all. Ta-ra.
They wanted Britain's riches for their empire. Copper, gold, and silver were things that they desired. Feasts and gladiators were Roman pleasures. Theaters and hypocausts were Roman treasures. The Romans were victorious. Their reign was glorious. They changed the Celtic way of life. With roads and baths and settlements and Roman decadence, they ruled this land for 400 years. Somebody tried to fight them. Her name was Boudica. She was a queen, a warrior of the Iceni tribe. Her army marched to Colchester and burned the temples down. They marched on to London, then on to St. Albans. The Romans were more organized, and to the Celts' surprise, the Romans got the upper hand and crushed the rebellion. And rather than be prisoner, the Iceni queen Boudica planned her own demise. She drank poison and died. The Romans were victorious. Their reign was glorious. They changed the Celtic way of life. With roads and baths and settlements and Roman decadence, they ruled this land for 400